to this week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today we're going to be talking about a new concept, a pathway for masters. I've been doing a lot of work over the years advocating and lobbying on behalf of masters rowing generally, both with event organisers, with federations, with clubs. Why is it that we aren't taken seriously? Why is it that when we want to use boats, the priority always appears to be for other groups in the club? And what are the things that we could actually do to resolve that? Now, this whole lobbying advocacy part of the Faster Masters brand was almost the second thing that Marlene and I did after we'd started the business. It was the beginning of lockdown when I realized that it was so heavily needed. And this coincided with me personally going onto the committee, the board that runs my club. It also coincided with a couple of other things. And so for a long time, I've been very motivated to speak out on behalf of masters, particularly because we are the fastest growing part of the rowing community online, and we deserve to get recognized and acknowledged and to have resources allocated to us and for the people who run the sport and set the policy to enable masters to row in the way that we want to row. We are not the same as youth rowers. And therefore, what's right for another group of athletes is not necessarily right for us. Today, I want to talk about one aspect of big picture policy setting for masters, and that is creating a pathway. I'll explain what that is in a minute, but the reason pathways are important is because this is the language that professional sport administrators already speak. They understand the context of what it means, what it influences, and what the outcomes are as a result of having a robust pathway. Overall, pathways guide policy for the sport. And that's one of the reasons why masters need to have their own strategy that is part of a national strategy or a regional strategy, or in the case of your club, the club strategy. I found it quite hard to get to grips with how to frame up the things that are needed for masters, backing it up to a sort of policy strategy level. It was very easy to look at issues like, oh, we don't get access to the coaching launches, or the equipment we have is not the right size for the cohort of people that we have in our group. Those things, I think, are actually symptomatic of a bigger issue. And that's what led me to something called systems thinking. I'm by no means an expert here, but it provided a really useful framework around which I could put in the challenges and issues that we see in masters rowing, and which I believe has begun to give me some of the means to get answers that will be really practical and applicable for you, and me back in the clubs that we're in, and working in and training in. So today, what I want to show you is the speech that I gave at our recent Older Athlete and Aging Conference. It sets out the call for the pathway. It helps you to see whether or not my reasoning is valid. And I'd love feedback. Anyone listening who wants to explain this in more detail, to help me work through some of the issues that have developed as a result of the beginning of this thought process, I would absolutely love it. I would love to have a working group of people from around the world who really want to work together locally and internationally to change our sport. At the end of the talk, I'll share my slide deck. And if you are on our newsletter, you will get this slide deck link sent to you when the newsletter comes out at lunchtime on Friday, the 24th of November. That's Eastern time. But I'm happy to put it into the show notes as well if you're a podcast listener and you're not a newsletter subscriber. Now, take a look at this. Let me know what you think. Systems thinking for masters rowing. Back in 2019, Marlene and I started the Faster Masters rowing business. And when lockdown happened in early 2020, a bunch of people who I know locally in the sport came together in order to talk about the things that we thought were broken in the Masters rowing system. This was provoked by an article. You can see the article on the right of this slide. It was called The Frustrations of Masters Rowers. And the New Zealand Rowing Magazine, or Sport, published it to their immense credit. The sort of problems that people experienced and they had told me about, this came from actual surveys that we'd done, so it wasn't just me guessing, was that there were a lack of people to form age group crews. We were ignorant of rigging and simple repairs. It was hard to find a coxswain. There weren't enough masters regattas. Boats were the wrong size. It was hard to get coaching. It was difficult to align people's availability, and therefore we ended up with inconsistent training times. It was also challenging to get going in racing crews for a lot of the reasons above, that, you didn't get enough practice. And overall, we felt that the decision makers in the sport of rowing forget that masters actually exist. And so a fabulous group of people got together and we had regular update meetings where we discussed what we perceived were our local challenges and what we could do to make masters rowing better here in New Zealand. Now, here's where the systems thinking approach comes in. The definition is it's a holistic approach to analysis that focuses on the way a system's constituent parts interrelate and how systems work over time and within the context of larger systems. So that for me meant my club works in the context of the National Rowing Federation for New Zealand, which works in the context of the World Rowing Federation. Similarly, regattas. Regattas tend to be organised locally. So where I live, these are the North Island regattas. We may travel outside of our region. Our province is the Auckland region, to go to regattas in adjacent provinces. But then when it comes to a national regatta, that could be held anywhere in the country. The thing that I thought this affected how we make masters rowing better was distilling this down into, firstly, learn to row. Obviously, many of you know that I learned to row when I was a student, but a lot of people come to rowing as adults. They join a club and the club's membership headcount grows. So these are the first two circles on this slide, which leads on to events and races. There are things that some people like to do to get together, which may be social, it may be racing. There are lots of different formats of these. And then ultimately for masters, we are all about rowing for life. So what are the things that are needed in order to enable us to carry on doing the sport that we love for as long as we want to? The first two bits, learning to row and growing the clubs, are led by the clubs. But events, races, and rowing for life are led by federations. Hence, you've already got two separate systems here, which is why we get variations, but also where we also see commonalities. Systems thinking helps us when focusing on policy for masters rowing, because there are 6 key themes: interconnectedness, synthesis, emergence, feedback loops, causality, and systems mapping. And I found 4 of these really useful when it came to solving the problems which I talked about earlier. These are interconnectedness, causality, feedback loops, and systems mapping. On this slide, I've got a list of those problems I talked about earlier and some solutions that have already been put into place and which may be relevant for you in your local rowing environment. So, for example, a lack of people to form age group crews. What are ways where masters can meet and connect? Really good example, Masters Rowing International Facebook group. We actually have a Facebook group in New Zealand. We also have a New Zealand Masters Rowing newsletter run by the Legion of Rowers. These are all ways where masters can connect with each other. Some are one-way conversations, others are dialogue. Too few masters regattas. I've been personally active here and advocating to regatta organisers. The San Diego Crew Classic has now introduced masters at new masters events. Finding a coxswain, the coxswain plank hack. And by the way, there are some links to some of these different things I'm describing here in the final slide. So if you get on our newsletter list, you'll get the slides and then you'll be able to follow the links. So the coxswain plank hack is a good example. It was an article I wrote for Row 2K in which we explain how to get someone who is not naturally coxswain sized into a cox's seat safely so that they can cox a crew. Ignorance of rigging. I went and found rigging experts who understand the needs of masters rowers, and we did a webinar called Rigging for Masters. And then the key then is you watch it, then you need to teach people locally in your club group what are the things that you can do. Boats that are the wrong size. Now, you're not instantly going to be able to go shopping and replace your fleet. So what are the adjustments that are easy to do that you can put in place? And a simple example were the split ring height washers, which you can then put into all of the oarlocks above and below the gate so that people can quickly raise and lower the oarlocks on the water or before going on the water to reflect their own personal height and weight. Seldom getting consistent practice in racing boats. I haven't solved this one yet, but I'm thinking of a few things that might be able to help. Difficult to find consistent training times. One of the things that I think helps this is digital club administration, a principle that we have advocated for, which is to reduce friction in your rowing club, enable self-service as much as possible so that masters can manage and run their bit of the club the way that suits their busy lives. We all know that people have childcare responsibilities. We often have busy jobs. Many of us have parental responsibilities as well. Some of us also are not particularly well ourselves. So we have to manage our lifestyle and our life cycles. You can't expect us to always be available at the same time, same day, every week. It's hard to get coaching. Well, let's look at new ways of getting coaching. Remote coaching or self-guided learning are things that Faster Masters Rowing is leading on. We are a rowing education business. We're not the only ones. There are lots of resources out there. Go and look for them. And then lastly, decision makers forget that masters exist. And that's where our lobbying work comes in, talking to federations and organisers and trying to advocate for masters and show them some of the things that we think will make rowing better for us. Which brings us to the athlete pathway. On the right of this is a picture of a standard athlete pathway taking a young person all the way to the Olympic Games and the World Championships. And it starts with rowing as play, leisure and recreation, maybe then joining a club, doing some basic competition, moving up to state or regional competition, which is more advanced, then into the pre-elite competition phases, which are things like the Anglo-France match, the European Championships, the Commonwealth Rowing Regatta, and then obviously elite competition. And this is for juniors and also for seniors. Note the absence of masters. So on the left in the words, I've tried to map out what I think is the current masters pathway. We learn to row and scull, do a learn to row course. You then maybe join a club group, start to train regularly. In many federations, you then become classified as a novice, and that gives you novice quality racing for a year, which is your first year generally in rowing. After this time, you are not a novice, and you move into age group racing. And this creates what I describe as a fail, or at least a very long time delay, because it's going to be a long time before somebody who is in their second year of rowing is generally competitive in age group masters racing. Now, there are some solutions here. If you put a bigger boat out with tolerant athletes who are prepared to race with less experienced people, obviously less experienced people can get faster quicker and can learn how to race hard and maybe get into finals and maybe medal in competition. But this learning journey isn't smooth, and jumping up in that example into a bigger boat with more experienced people masks the learning that is needed in order to master the individual parts of all the things it takes to race well, and masks their achievement. That achievement is really important to a learning journey. Those intermediate stages have a benefit. It's extremely rare, even in junior and senior competition, for someone to jump up 2 or 3 levels, to go from local club races to suddenly winning in national races. So here's a proposal. How could we make a master's pathway? So starting with learning to row or scull, take your novice racing for a year if that's how things are generally run where you live. And then move into an intermediate category of new masters racing, which lasts between 2 and 5 years, where you are racing other people whose learning is equivalent to yours. And one of the reasons I think this is so helpful before moving into age group racing is that masters don't get as many training sessions in a year as a junior who's in a high school program or a club program or a senior athlete. Some of us train once, twice, 3 times a week, particularly when you're new to the sport and you're still finding your feet. There may not be opportunities even to row more frequently than that. Therefore, it takes us longer to acquire the same level of skill and capability as a junior or senior athlete. That's why we need more time before going into elite competition. So what's needed to make this suggestion of an intermediate category succeed? We need federations to recognize this as a status. It provides that top-down leadership which enables it to be generally accepted. And then regattas need to offer events. Now, these are not necessarily a first you need one and then the other, because where I live, regattas make their own rules of racing, and as a consequence, they can offer these events themselves. They don't need the federation to endorse it, but it may be different where you live. It also requires clubs to continue to offer learn to row classes. We all know that next year is an Olympic year. We've also got a couple of hugely popular rowing context movies coming out. Lessons in Chemistry is on Apple Plus at the moment. The Boys in the Boat gets released on Christmas Day in the US and in early January around the rest of the world. These are going to fuel the general public's interest in our sport. And as clubs, can we cope with large numbers of people who want to try rowing? That's going to challenge us, and it's a discussion for another day. But I very, very much want to have that discussion because I'd love to see more people try rowing. The other thing that's needed to succeed are hyper-local events, something that you can participate in that takes a morning, that doesn't require more than an hour's travel, and that you can get home quickly. These can be events that are quite small, and they're deliberately orientated around this group of new masters who are learning to race, interested in socializing with other masters, and trying out different things, maybe on a lake or river that's somewhere else other than when you normally train. It's an important stepping stone, and that's why I think the master's pathway is so important. Overall, I believe that all these efforts for diversity and inclusion will fail unless masters is actively included as a anti-aging or anti-ageist part of diversity initiatives. Take a look at what's happening in your area and see what you can do around community experiences, creating strong clubs and racing, so that we build a really good future for masters rowing around the world. These are the resources that I mentioned earlier. You can get them by joining the Faster Masters Rowing newsletter. So go to fastermastersrowing.com/newsletter, or alternatively, message me and I'll be able to share them with you. Our broader work on advocacy is contained not just in that first article about the frustrations of masters rowers. It's also a series of articles which are freely available to you if you want to use them for your local club, your newsletter, Facebook page, wherever. All you have to do is acknowledge the source of the article was Faster Masters Rowing. To receive one of these every 4 weeks, go to fastermastersrowing.com/advocacy. And at the bottom of the page there, you can sign up to receive one each 4 weeks. And you get the basic text and you get a nicely formatted PDF of the article, depending on how you want to use it. Now, I really welcome the opportunity to come and speak to any group that you're involved with who might like to see the slide deck that I've just presented to you. I want to socialize this. I want to start more conversations, and I can't do it on my own. So I need lots of help from you with ideas of who to speak to, what's been missed out, how I could focus, refine, advance some of the ideas that are located in that overall slide deck. So the call out now is very much, what can you do to help me make our sport the best it possibly can? Till next time. Bye-bye.
You're part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.